Right. So when Japanese speakers are pronouncing these words, when they're pronouncing the nasal sounds, now these sounds are the nasal sounds, there's no problem when the nasal sound is at the beginning of a word. So when they say male, when Japanese speakers say male, I can clearly hear a correct pronunciation of the first sound, the first nasal sound, the first sound, or the sound at the beginning of this word male. And it's the same for nail. Now I can clearly hear the difference when I hear Japanese speakers say male and nail. So there's no problem when they pronounce the nasal sound when it is at the beginning of a word, like in the words male and nail. Now, if a nasal sound is at the end of a word, like in the word ram and in the word ran, that's where that's where the problem occurs. So I observed that these three words, ram, ran, and rang, are the same to the ears of a Japanese speaker. So I created a video. I created a video about nasal sounds. I created a video about nasal sounds, and this video explains the difference between one nasal sound and another nasal sound when they are at the end of a word. Now, I know that Japanese speakers can also pronounce nasal sounds when they are at the end of a word, but they're not used to pronouncing different kinds of nasal sounds if those nasal sounds are at the beginning of a word. So what they need to do is just to practice. So I know they can pronounce nasal sounds when they are at the beginning of a word, but they're not used to it. They're not used to pronouncing nasal sounds, different kinds of nasal sounds when they're at the end of a word. So what they need to do is to practice until they get used to pronouncing nasal sounds wherever they are. So if nasal sounds are at the beginning of a word, Japanese speakers have no problem pronouncing nasal sounds at the beginning of a word. However, if they are at the end of a word, I would say they need to practice pronouncing them. So there are some words that you can use to practice pronouncing nasal sounds when they are at the end of a word. I'll give you some examples of words that you can use. Let's look at the first two words first. So one example is the word mom. Right, before we start, if you didn't watch my video about nasal sounds and other videos related to it, then I suggest you watch those videos too. So look up those videos on my channel. One is nasal sounds, another is bilabial sounds, another is alveolar sounds, and velar sounds. So I created videos about nasal sounds, bilabial sounds, alveolar sounds, and velar sounds. So check those out. And after you watch those videos, then watch this video about words for practice. So when you need to practice pronouncing nasal sounds when they are at the end of a word. Right. So first example is the word mom. Now I'm sure you can clearly pronounce the first sound. That's easy. So this is how you should pronounce it. The first sound should be exactly the same to the last sound. They should be exactly the same. The M sound and another M sound. So if they're not the same, then something's wrong. You got to change how you pronounce the last sound, because the first sound and the last sound should be exactly the same. They should be exactly the same. And it's the same for the word none. None. The first sound is the N sound, and the last sound is also the N sound. Now they should be exactly the same. If they're not, then you're pronouncing it the wrong way. So they should be exactly the same. That's your biggest clue. They should be exactly the same. And for the last one, this NG sound, the first NG sound, and the last NG sound should also be exactly the same. I think this one is easier to pronounce. I'm also sure that this would be easy to pronounce. The difficulty would lie with this one, the last N sound. The last N sound would be the most difficult one. The Japanese speakers are, I think, very much familiar with the final nasal velar sound. Like when you say mang, I don't know if that's 100 or 1000, but when you say mang, what I hear usually when I hear the Japanese word mang is the ng sound, the velar sound. So these two sounds, consonants, should be exactly the same. They should be exactly the same. For this one, your lips are closed, and another so those are two sounds. Now for this one, it's the N sound, and they should be exactly the same. So this usually when I hear a Japanese speaker pronounce this last nasal sound, I hear an NG sound sometimes. So your lips should not be closed. Your lips should not be closed when you're pronouncing the N sound. And it's the same for this one. It should not sound like it's an M sound. It should be an N sound, and they should be exactly the same. The first and the last sound, the first and last sounds of the word none should be exactly the same. That's where this is what you need to practice a lot. I'm sure you can pronounce it, but you're not used to it. So what you need to do is to practice, and practice until you get used to it, until you feel comfortable pronouncing the final N sound. All right. So this one is not the same. It's not. This one and this one are not the same sound. This and this are not the same sound too. I know that in the Japanese language, there's only one Japanese character which represents these three sounds when they are at the end of a word. Of course, in the English language, it's not the same. So this is what you need to practice. The N sound. It should be an alveolar sound. And if you don't know the meaning of alveolar, watch my videos about alveolar sounds.